Hello, I'm Swagat. I'm a senior consultant with Frost and Sullivan in the energy and environment domain. And in this webinar, I'm going to talk about the hydrogen economy. So, um, with the increasing conscious towards the climate change and as well as increasing carbon emissions, so many countries are actually grappling for solutions to how to control the carbon emissions and also how to reach carbon neutrality. And so many countries have identified these different measures as a strong solutions toward the ways in which they can control their carbon emissions and achieve carbon neutrality and as well as decarbonize their different polluting sectors as well. So none of these are new. So we have all seen these solutions, like in various parts of our research and as well in life. So in terms of the first one, so rise of renewables. So in recent years, there have been a lot of investments across the increasing renewable capacity, as well as many countries have realized that renewables is the way to go forward in order to cut down their reliance on fossil fuels as well as to ensure the energy security as well. And hydrogen economy. So hydrogen economy is not something new, but it has been the talk for almost 3 to 4 decades now, and until recently, where many countries have realized its real potential, and it's the correct time to actually invest in the hydrogen economy in order to actually to reach our climate goals and direct electrification and renewable heat. And this is also one of the major solutions in which many countries are actually looking to replace their fossil fuel controlled industries, and replace the fossil fuel systems with electrical ones across a major industry or major polluting industries like steel, cement, and also other chemicals. And emission management is a new thing, and also this is also one of the effective measures, like in which countries can actually implement to reduce their carbon emissions, and as well as also you can trade their emissions as well. So we have something called carbon trading, carbon pricing, and everything. So these all comes under the emissions management. And energy efficiency, so this is also one of the most important things through which many countries can actually reduce their carbon emissions. So it's a practice through which like you implement energy efficient practices like circular economy, sustainable practices through which you can drastically cut down a lot of emission, and as well as recycle a lot of waste materials, reduce a lot of waste and everything, through which we can actually lead towards a sustainable future. So together, so all these solutions combined as a whole will enable us to reach our climate goals. And it's very important that every country actually focuses on all these pillars, and then ensures that they take sufficient steps to actually implement these measures, and focus towards cutting down their emissions from across the different business sectors. And coming to the key topic of today, hydrogen economy. So in recent years, there have been a lot of interest across many governments and also across many institutions. So they have come up with, like many countries have come up with these hydrogen strategies in which they want to implement, and also they want to build a lot of hydrogen infrastructure. They want to use hydrogen across much of their business sectors, including the mobility and as well as industries, and as well as they want to like store the hydrogen through which you can use it in terms of demand, everything. So there have been a lot of hype, and as well as recognition of hydrogen as one of the green carrier in which hydrogen can cut down a lot of emissions, and hydrogen can enable us to reach a um, uh, carbon neutral value. So why all this hype over hydrogen? So why not over other any other element or any other chemical? So the main thing is that like hydrogen is available everywhere, and so it can be produced in different variety of ways, and it can be also stored and transported, and it can be converted into different forms through which it can find its applications across different business segments. So for example, the hydrogen produced from renewables, that's called green hydrogen. So it can find its application across the industries like steel, in which it can cut down a lot of carbon emissions from the steel industry. And when combined with nitrogen, so it is able to we are able to get green ammonia which is can be used as a fuel for marine ships, which should actually cut down a lot of emissions from the marine sector. So hydrogen, when combined with the carbon, which is captured and stored, so we convert it into different forms like synthetic methane, diesel, methanol. So it can be used across a variety of chemical industries, as well as it can be used as a marine fuel as well as a aviation fuel. So this ability of hydrogen, which can be converted into different forms and also can be used as a feedstock or also a direct source of power generation, makes it a much suitable element for, as it can be used to reduce the emissions and which can be used to decarbonize a variety of business segments. So hydrogen spectrum. So like I mentioned earlier, hydrogen comes, based on the type of production. So it comes in different colors. So its more natural form, it's called gold hydrogen. So where hydrogen occurs in natural form in geological formation in caves. And we have black hydrogen, so which is the hydrogen produced from coal gasification. And then we have gray hydrogen, which is formed through the natural gas. And then we have most common green hydrogen, which is produced from renewable energies. Also, with increase in with carbon capture and storage, and so we have blue hydrogen, which is so you produce the same way in which you produce from natural gas, but the carbon dioxide released is stored and also utilized for different purposes. So that's blue hydrogen. And in recent years, there are also much emphasis on new technology called methane pyrolysis, so in which the natural gas burned is converted into hydrogen, but instead of carbon dioxide, the whole carbon dioxide is converted into carbon black, which again find its application across different industries as well, like for producing tires as well as for making pigments. So this hydrogen is now it becomes a turquoise hydrogen. And also beside this, we also have hydrogen produced from algae, from biomass, and as well as even we have hydrogen produced from solar PV and as well as from nuclear as well. So that there's a huge spectrum of hydrogen available to us, and the cost economics for each of these different processes is different from each other. And right now, hydrogen produced from natural gas is one of the most cheapest way in which in the market. But like when you go down like 10 to 15 years from now, the green hydrogen would definitely likely to catch up and become reach cost parity with the gray hydrogen. Looking at the value chain. So in terms of the value chain, so we have three different types where we have the production of hydrogen, and we have the storage and transport of hydrogen, and then we have the utilization of hydrogen. And each of these elements have huge challenges in themselves. So right now, green hydrogen is produced from renewables, but as we go down the future, the amount of hydrogen required to decarbonize any industry will require a dedicated or huge amounts of renewable energy capacity. So that's going to be one of the challenges in the next 10 to 15 years, where like the people who many countries would actually require definitely a dedicated hydrogen renewable energy capacity to produce hydrogen. So that's going to be one of the challenges, because right now much of the renewable energy capacity is only used for to balancing the demand and supply as well as for the energy security. But as the demand for hydrogen increases, we would need a dedicated hydrogen, and that's going to be one of the major challenges. The next major challenge for hydrogen is that the absence of dedicated storage and transport infrastructures. So right now, one of the main ways in which you can transport hydrogen is to convert the green hydrogen into green ammonia, which can be transported different distances via ships. And many countries are actually in the national strategies have put forward a plan of converting hydrogen into green ammonia and then transporting it to larger distances. So initially, all the transport will happen through green ammonia, but as the technology processes, so there might be different ways in which hydrogen can be transported as well as stored. And another important technology where many countries are looking at is that so instead of ammonia, so this hydrogen can also be blended into the existing gas grids, and which can be stored, also transported over the long distances. But many countries have a gas grid in different states, and amount of hydrogen which any gas can accommodate depends upon the state of the gas grid as well. And many countries are actually exploring ways in which how much percentage of hydrogen that can be injected into this gas grids for safe storage and transport. That again is a challenge which many countries needs to solve. And in terms of utilization, so many countries have focused in the initial stages. Many countries are initially focused only on utilization of hydrogen across the mobility as well as the industry segment. So that's where bulk of the emissions, carbon emissions come from. So in the next 5 to 10 years, so in terms of utilization, so bulk of the hydrogen applications will go for the mobility and industrial segments. So in terms of key countries which are actually have their own hydrogen developments, so looking at the key countries, so US is one of the key countries because the country has huge, tremendous renewable energy potentials, and in terms of technology, so it has a lot of industries, a wide variety of industries and startups which are actually focused on hydrogen technologies, and they're actively collaborating with each other to produce to work on its different hydrogen technologies. And also the US is actually planning to become one of the key exporter as well. So, and it's already in talks with other Asian countries as well as Latin American countries where it could export the hydrogen. And in terms of which hydrogen, so US is actually looking at both green and blue because of the carbon capture and utilization is already commercial at certain parts of the US, and there are a lot of pilot projects going on targeting production of blue hydrogen across different states. And coming to Latin America, so the whole region has a huge potential for renewable energies, and this region has a lot of potential to generate to produce green hydrogen. And Chile is one of those countries with a lot of wind potential, and the country has actually in the hydrogen strategies, so actually come up with a plan that they want to become a leading exporter for green hydrogen, and they also want to develop the cheapest green hydrogen market as well. So Northern Africa, it's still very early stages for the Northern Africa, but this region has a lot of potential for solar and as well as for the wind. And once the governments like the Egypt or Morocco, they have the proper regulatory frameworks to support the production of hydrogen. So this region could actually become a gold field for green hydrogen, where the green hydrogen can be produced and then that can transport it to the different parts of Europe via the available pipelines. And Germany is already in talks with establishing pipelines all the way from Germany to the Northern Africa, where the green hydrogen produced from this region can be transported to Europe for meeting its energy demands. Again, Gulf region, including the countries like UAE, as well as Saudi Arabia. So they have come up with a lot of ambitious plans to establish a huge electrolyzer capacity, and their key focus is on blue and green hydrogen itself. And given their technology, given their investment readiness, so and also in terms of technology as well, so there are a lot of projects that are likely to come up in this region, and this region is likely to become one of the bigger exporters. And similarly, China. So China is a huge market for hydrogen. So China already uses bulk of almost 40% of the global hydrogen is used in China, and its plan is to become one of the leading leaders in the fuel cells as well as in the storage market. And China is actually right now developing its strategy for hydrogen, and it wants to make effective use of its huge renewable capacity to become a leading market across the green hydrogen. So in terms of the potential role of the key countries in the future, so like I mentioned about Chile, so Chile has been, because of its huge wind energy potential and as well as and as well as the cost of electrolyzers. So it can become one of the key countries to produce green hydrogen and also become one of the key exporters of green hydrogen. And Australia, so Australia right now is one of the happening markets for hydrogen, where it has already established itself as a huge market, and it has already, in talks with Japan and Korea for what do you call, for transporting hydrogen in form of ammonia to these two countries. And there are a lot of pilot projects, there are a lot of investments that are happening across Australia, and in the next 5 years there are a lot of the bulk of the happenings or bulk of the developments in the hydrogen sector across the world is going to happen in Australia, and this country is going to become one of the leading exporters as well. So in terms of the European regions of France, Netherlands, Germany, UK, so they have all come up with their own hydrogen strategies, and they are actively pushing forward with a lot of pilot projects available, and as well as with a lot of investments to actually increase their production of green hydrogen, and as well as other forms of hydrogen as well. Japan and Korea, so is one of the key countries. So due to lack of the space as well as the lack of sufficient renewable energy capacities, so they are actually going to be one of the biggest importers of hydrogen. And Japan and Korea, they are actually focused on becoming one of the leaders in fuel cells, where the hydrogen will be used, and power generation is one of the areas where they want to use the fuel cells and the hydrogen for balancing their supply supply and demand. And in this slide we see about the developments across Europe. So the key takeaway message is that overall in the Europe we are looking at actually 40 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity coming online by 2030, and there are actually investments greater than 450 billion until 2030, which are actually many countries have planned. And hydrogen is going to be a bigger market. Green hydrogen in particular is going to be a bigger market across this region. And in terms of key areas of support, so we have industries and transport. So much of the focus across the different countries is only on industry and transport. That's where bulk of the carbon emissions from Europe also comes from. So this slide we see a production forecast, and so these are, when you look at the hydrogen forecast available online, so many trends show that so due to the demand, so they have very high numbers, and some of also it shows a very low demand as well. And we have come up with a low base and high scenario, and we typically think that the base scenario is more like an optimal one through which through which the hydrogen demand is going to increase. So this shows up across like production of the production forecast in terms of colors. So gray hydrogen is going to be dominant until 2030, and after which we can see the reduction in the gray hydrogen. And so with the carbon capture and storage technology becoming commercialized by 2025, and as well as the increasing renewable energy capacities, so we see that the blue hydrogen and green hydrogen taking over the gray hydrogen. And also we see a lot of like many countries are now actually thinking about, instead of retiring the nuclear capacity, so in turn they can focus or they can redirect their existing nuclear capacity to produce hydrogen as well. So so this hydrogen produced from either through methane pyrolysis and also hydrogen nuclear, so also one of the ways in which we can produce more hydrogen and meet the hydrogen demand as well. So other forms of hydrogen is also expected to take over after post 2030, and so we expect to see a lot of interesting things, a variety of different production methods, reaching a cost parity with the gray hydrogen and taking over the production as well. In terms of the hydrogen market, the ecosystem, the entire market is right now, like it's a very much a happening space where there are a lot of companies, a lot of startups, there are a lot of SMEs, available in this space across a different huge variety of hydrogen. Like we have a lot of companies across electrolyzer as electrolyzer manufacturers. We have a lot of infrastructure developers, so a lot of companies focused on storage, and we expect to see this market becoming more and more active in the coming years. And we also expect to see a lot of mergers and acquisitions happen across this market as well. So coming to the roadmap for hydrogen, so actually the key takeaway message that so hydrogen economy cannot be like just achieved in a matter of 10 years. So it would take at least 10 to 15 years for us before us to establish a proper set of groundwork and regulatory frameworks on which we can develop the hydrogen economy. So the next 5 to 10 years will be basically about development of proper regulatory frameworks and development of pilot and demonstration projects. And post 2030, so we can see a lot of commercialization happening, and as well as the rollout of big electrolyzer and renewable energy products. And post 2040, so we can see a huge gigawatt scale electrolyzer projects coming online, and a lot of colors, a spectrum of colors of hydrogen, as well as coming up to actually supply the demand for the hydrogen. So in terms of key growth opportunities, so we identified 4 main growth opportunities for hydrogen. So one is the power to hydrogen, so which is actually converting the hydrogen into different forms, which can be used as a direct fuel or as a feature across different industries. And the other is the important role of ammonia, so as a green energy carrier, so which can be used to to decarbonize the maritime and aviation industry, as well as used as the storage medium to transport the clean hydrogen, and the hydrogen itself as a energy storage medium, and can be used during peak demand. So that's also one of the growth opportunity to identify hydrogen. And lastly, development of infrastructures, dedicated infrastructures like hydrogen refueling stations, hydrogen production centers, and everything. So that's going to be one of the growth opportunities in the coming years as well. So power to X technologies. So the key, this is actually a way in which like the hydrogen can be converted into different forms. So it can be converted into a fuel which can be used for running the fuel cells. It can be converted into a different chemical form which can be used across the chemical industry. Methanol can be used across the chemical industries or across glass industries or petrochemical industries. It can be used as a direct fuel in the steel industry as well. So the process of converting hydrogen into its different forms is called as power to X technologies, and this is one of the key growth opportunities of hydrogen. And Denmark, in its hydrogen strategy, has identified this power to X technology as one of the key ways in which Denmark can achieve carbon neutrality. So I talked about ammonia. So earlier, ammonia was used mainly for fertilizers and parts for textiles and pharmaceuticals. But in the coming years, when we have a huge renewable energy potential, so those renewable energy can be transported to different parts of the world by converting into green ammonia. And also this green ammonia can be used for electricity generations as a fuel for maritime and aviation, and as well as can be stored and transported, like I mentioned earlier, and also across the key chemical industries as well. So in the next 15 years, like the green ammonia becomes a new commodity for countries, to either use as a decarbonizing agent or it can be used as a transport agent as well. And I already talked about blending in hydrogen. So this again one of the key growth opportunities through which hydrogen can be either stored and transported, or it can be used, for supplying heat, for industries where in which carbon emissions can be actually drastically cut down. So coming to the key conclusions, so the focus of the decade ahead will be for the countries to first establish proper set of regulatory frameworks, and also in terms of get the investments ready for building up the infrastructure. So the next important thing is the country should expand their R&D so that they can bring down the costs associated with the production as well as the storage and transport of hydrogen. And the third important thing is we need to actually ramp up the electrolyzer capacity to actually bring down the costs associated with the production of hydrogen from electrolysis. And lastly, so instead of green hydrogen, so every country also should focus on like other colors of hydrogen, like turquoise as well as pink hydrogen, that is using nuclear, which can be also used to satisfy the demand for hydrogen in the coming years. So it's going to be really interesting years for the hydrogen, and we believe that hydrogen economy could be the answer, in order to achieve climate goals. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Swagat. And we now have we've some time set aside for questions and answers. My name is Barry Flynn. I'll be putting any questions that you might have to Swagat. Swagat, can you hear us okay?
Yeah, I can hear you, Barry. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Yes, we can hear you, Lila. I know Swagat was having some broadband issues towards the end there, so we're going to keep his camera off at the minute. But just a reminder, if you do have any questions, just pop them into the chat. I see we've well over 100 people online at the minute, so the numbers have been great. And if you have any questions that you'd like me to put to Swagat, just put it into the chat, and we'll try to get round as many as possible. And we have had a couple of questions in so far. So the first one we'll get straight in is, do you think green hydrogen is the way forward towards our transition towards decarbonization?
Definitely. So hydrogen is one of the ways, through which we can actually achieve decarbonization. So the other ways are, besides hydrogen, is increase your share of renewables in the energy mix. We have hydrogen, which can be used as a green fuel across different business segments. And then we have energy efficiency measures and also other forms of energy. So hydrogen is not the only solution, in our journey towards decarbonization, but it is definitely one of the ways through which can accelerate our transition towards decarbonization.
So as you say, it's not the only solution, but it'll fit within the overall mix. Next question, and again, it's someone who's just picked up on one of your last slides, which says that the government support is required and it's vital. Are you seeing that there's a will or a recognition from government that support is vital?
Definitely, and it's because because right now the production part and as well as the storage and transportation part for the hydrogen is pretty much on the higher side. And if we need to increase the adoption of green hydrogen, so we need to actually reduce the costs associated with the production and the storage part. And that's where the role of government is pretty much essential. We need incentives, we need support mechanisms to actually finance the electrolyzer plants and also increase the scale of these electrolyzer plants, and also bring down any other costs associated with the hydrogen there. So we need definitely a lot of help from the hydrogen in the initial days. Sorry, from the government in the initial days. Yeah.
Great. So questions coming in thick and fast now, and just to let people, a couple people have asked about copies of the recording, etc. We'll be uploading this onto investineye.com in the next day or two. So just keep an eye on your emails. We'll send you out. Questions come in, Swagat. On the Europe map, which was your slide 9, there's no comment on the potential of Ireland for renewable hydrogen generation, and someone just asked if you have any thoughts on Ireland's position.
Yeah, sorry about that. So yeah, definitely there is there's a lot of, we see a lot of hydrogen activities going on in the Ireland, and Ireland is one of the countries, there's a lot of potential for offshore, and we see a lot of hydrogen production activities connecting the offshore and the hydrogen production, where the electrolyzer plants might be situated close to those offshore farms as well.
And questions which was very specific to Northern Ireland, and I'm not sure if you know the answer to this, but if not, we can follow up later. But do you know who's working on hydrogen specifically in Northern Ireland, and how much hydrogen is being produced in Northern Ireland?
I'm sorry, I don't have a specific number to that. Yeah. Sorry, probably I might be able to get the answer though. So
that's okay. So just on the summary slide, why only green and turquoise as the future of hydrogen? Does blue hydrogen play a role to move away from fossil fuel-based energy?
Yeah, definitely blue hydrogen definitely does a key role there, but our main goal is actually to reduce the carbon emissions. And in terms of turquoise and any other forms of hydrogen, so there is no actually carbon emissions involved. So green hydrogen definitely would help us, on our transition towards decarbonization. But once we reach a point there, where we actually really want to cut down the carbon emissions, and that's where the turquoise and green hydrogen plays a major role.
Okay,
And
thank you very
also
much.
adding to that, so there's a lot of uncertainty, right now in terms of the blue hydrogen, and we already expect that, the cost of the green hydrogen becoming less than the cost of the green hydrogen in the coming years. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Thanks very much, Swaggart. So the next question, it says, is the current bottleneck in hydrogen production capacity, or is it insufficient distribution network?
I'm sorry, could you please repeat that one?
Yes, so it's question number 4. It says, is the current bottleneck in hydrogen production a capacity issue, or is it insufficient distribution?
It's a capacity issue, definitely, because to satisfy a global demand for hydrogen, we need huge gigawatt scales of electrolyzer plants. But right now, it's a capacity issue which actually limits us, in the production of green hydrogen.
Great. And the questions are coming in second fast, so I'll keep going with these. So the question is, and again, I'm not a hydrogen expert, so hopefully you can keep me right on this. Well, is hydrogen a better option than biomethane to replace natural gas in terms of GHG emissions?
Definitely, right now, looking at the cost of production for biomethane, it is pretty much on the higher side, and also looking at the scale, with respect to the production. So you need huge infrastructure and as well as huge place to produce the biomethane. So that's where, right now that's a major constraint for biomethane. But whereas with respect to hydrogen, it doesn't take up much space, and also the cost associated with the production right now when compared to biomethane is very much less, and it can easily be converted into methane as well with carbon dioxide.
Great, thanks very much. We do have time for a few more questions, so if you do have any, just pop them into the chat, and we'll try our best to get around some, but we still have some more to get through now. So this is a long question, Swaggart. It says, your slides showed the use of fuel cells supplied from hydrogen networks in a number of sectors, including residential, which would be supplied by distribution networks. Where hydrogen is to be used to balance differences between renewable electricity generation and demand, fuel cells used in combined heat and power solution here appears a very efficient, very energy efficient solution, and would increase energy resilience. Would you have a comment on that? It's number 7 in the chat just there, Swaggart, because I know it is quite a long, detailed question, but hopefully I've captured it.
Yeah, definitely. So right now, it's too early for the hydrogen, to be used in the combined heat and power solution for grid balancing activities. So, and like you said, so in the coming years, the production of hydrogen would be mostly used for the grid balancing one, and the use of fuel cells probably for the grid balancing or any other activities. Probably we can witness probably after 25 to 30 years. So right now, the main application of hydrogen here is going to produce the hydrogen whenever there is excess of power in terms of renewables, and then you use it for the industrial activities, mainly to reduce the carbon emissions there.
Great, thanks very much. A question, a lot of what we were talking about was high scale production and scaling up, but someone's asked, is it sustainable to produce hydrogen on a small scale, for example, on a farm that has its own wind power, so very localized?
Definitely, it is sustainable. So, but looking at the cost of a typical electrolyzer plant, so still, the cost needs to come down to make it on a more sustainable part. And also with respect to, with respect to the cost of production of hydrogen and the whole, because you need to produce hydrogen and then you need to consume it as well. So as long as you have a utilization which is also pretty much close to the site of production, it is indeed a very sustainable way.
Okay, but as you say, like all these things, it's reliable on costs coming down. What are the main alternatives to hydrogen in terms of decarbonisation? I know we're focusing on a hydrogen economy here, but what would be considered the main alternatives to hydrogen?
Yes, like mentioned in the first slide. So for hydrogen, so we also need a lot of renewables. So we need a lot of dedicated renewables to actually reduce the share of fossil fuels in our energy mix, and also we need a better alternate fuels like nuclear could be a good option, and also we need something like energy efficiency measures, and we need emissions management as well. So besides hydrogen, these other factors also play a major role, in our journey towards decarbonization.
Great, thanks very much. I'm not sure if you know the answer to this. Someone just said, can you recommend any books or any good reading material on the whole use and potential with hydrogen? And don't worry if I put you on the spot, because we can follow up after the webinar with that quite a specific question.
You can actually look up in the IEA website, IEA, Indian Atomic Energy, or sorry, Indian Energy Agency. So where there are a lot of good reading materials for hydrogen there.
That's great. Thanks very much. A question just on sectors. Which sector or sectors are likely to adopt hydrogen? And I suppose in the wider sense, and maybe more specifically in Northern Ireland, and why do you think that would be?
Yeah, right now the major focus for hydrogen, particularly the green hydrogen, across Europe or even Northern Ireland, would be mainly across the industries, followed by transportation. So that's where the major bulk of the emissions lie, and also that's where the storage and transportation is all the factor is less as well. So initially, the next 10 to 15 years, the bulk of the green hydrogen focus will be mainly across the industries, and then probably for transportation.
Great. Couple more questions still here if you still have time, Swagus. Thanks very much to everyone for such great engagement. We've had lots of questions and some good discussions. Question says, what are your thoughts on governments developing and increasing nuclear power as opposed to hydrogen development, which you mentioned nuclear power is part of the overall mix?
So nuclear power also could complement hydrogen. So besides renewables, or nuclear power from nuclear also could be used to produce hydrogen as well. And also, so whenever, like when you are drastically cutting down your coal power plants, and as well as other forms of other carbon emitting power plants. So, and also when you're going to start to rely on renewables, so renewables, they have their own intermittent nature. So whenever we have a dull climate or so, there's going to be a shortage of power. So we need a complementary power, to actually to support the renewables as well. So that's where the role of nuclear power plants is actually huge, very significant there. And I personally believe that, like initially many European countries wanted to shut down the nuclear power plants, but with these recent gas issues, like now the countries have decided to extend the lifetime of the nuclear power plants as well. And that's going to be, one of the key factors as well, complementing hydrogen as well as the renewables.
Yeah, complementary, as you say. Your slides, Swagus, where you looked at the map of the world and what regions are doing what. Is there one particular region or area that you would say is leading the way in this?
No, I mean, because we are still, we just started the race, and actually maybe, I mean, if we say a region, that means Europe. There's a lot of interesting things going on across the Europe in terms of hydrogen production, because a lot of countries are actually investing a lot in electrolyzer plants, as well as looking at different ways in which they can reduce the cost of green hydrogen, and also looking at the ways they can utilize the hydrogen as well. So I would say Europe as an interesting region in terms of green hydrogen.
Great. That's all the questions that I have. That's all the questions that have been submitted. So, Swagus, thanks very much again for your very detailed presentation, and also for taking the time with the questions. We've had great engagement, as I say, with with those that have joined us, both in terms of number of people online, but also in terms of the questions and the discussions that we've had. So I really appreciate everyone for joining us, everyone for taking part, and Swagat, thanks again. Just a reminder that if keep an eye on investineye.com/events for further events and webinars. Everything that InvestIneye has planned is listed there, and it's a great starting point if you're looking for more information on more of these events to attend. So unless you have anything else you'd like to add?
No, nothing.
Perfect, that's great. Well, thanks again, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you.